Motion pictures, a revolutionary invention. Motion pictures tremendously revolutionized Americans and people globally. It gave people something to turn to in times of grief, and it made people think differently, dress differently, and act differently. Reeling into the 20th century, the global motion picture revolution. Motion pictures took centuries to develop. The first successful attempt to project lifelike images was in 1659. Huygens invented the magic lantern. This creation used a light source to project an image through transparent hand-painted glass. In 1872, the first successful series of photographs were made. Leland Stanford, the governor of California, asked photographer Edwin Muybridge to settle a bet, showing that horses lifted all four hoofs off the ground while running. Muybridge set up 24 cameras on the racetrack, and as the horse ran by, photos were taken. When the photos were put together, a moving picture was made.
In 1908, many filmmakers relocated to California due to the cheap land and labor. By the beginning of the 1920s, Hollywood had become the world's film capital, recruiting some of the most famous foreign actors and actresses. Movie attendance during this era soared. By 1925, 50 million people a week went to the movies. One of the first American movies, Birth of a Nation, demonstrated the power and popularity that movies could have. It also showed that huge profits could be made. They brought in $18 million in revenues. However, in 1939, Hollywood was hit hard by the Depression, but managed to recoup its profits through a variety of methods. The promise of just a little bit of money was a big draw for impoverished Americans.
During the time of the Great Depression, film was a source of cheerful escapism for most. 60 to 80 million Americans attended the movies each week, and in the face of doubt and despair, films helped sustain national morale and kept alive the belief in the possibility of individual success.
The motion pictures have revolutionized the way Americans look at the world, the way they dress, the way they act, the way they involve themselves in relationships.
Motion pictures began to spread beyond American borders and revolutionized the economics and cultures of foreign countries. The American motion picture industry was also influenced by other industries such as Asia's. Many popular American films were influenced by Asian cinema. For example, Kill Bill 1 and 2 were influenced by Japanese action, and Moulin Rouge by Bollywood. Sundance Film Festival director Jeff Gilmore said, "If you ask me where in the last decade and a half the world's greatest filmmakers have come from, there's one simple answer: Asia. Asian films were a global, cultural, and economic force."
Bollywood is one of the largest centers of film production in the world. Filmmaking in Bollywood can be traced back to 1896, when the Lumiere brothers unveiled films in Bombay. But the Indian film industry didn't really start until 1899, when Harishchandra Badbadkar filmed and played 2 short films in a kinetoscope. This preceded the release of the film Raja Harishchandra by Dada Saheb Phalke on May 13, 1913. Satyajit Ray's film Padar Panchali put Indian cinema on the world map, winning 2 awards at the Cannes Film Festival.
Following India's independence, the period from the late 1940s to 1960s are regarded by film historians as the golden age of Indian cinema. Residents of Dharvi, where part of Slumdog Millionaire was shot, are using the movie to help them pressure their government to support their rights and continue to redevelop the area. India's influences include Hollywood from the 1920s to 1950s, when the musicals were popular.
Meanwhile, in China, films were also influenced by elements from Hollywood, such as a thrill-a-minute philosophy and fast pacing and editing. The elegant, gravity-defying choreography of China martial art films has become the universal language of action movies everywhere. The Chinese film industry was based in Shanghai because of its access to foreign materials and cooperation of the Chinese and foreigners. A decade after the Lumiere brothers dazzled Paris with their moving pictures in 1895, director Zheng Qingtai produced China's first motion picture, The Battle of Dingzhunshan. Since then, motion pictures have become one of the most prominent forms of entertainment in China. By 1916, Shanghai, the biggest city in the Far East, was home to a growing film industry.
The National Film Censorship Committee was formed in 1931 and had a drastic impact on the film industry. Another big influence on the film industry included Japanese aggression toward China. In September 1931, the Japanese invasion of Manchuria made films, fantasy, and entertainment irrelevant. During the Second Sino-Japanese War, anti-Japanese films enjoyed an increase in popularity. In 1937, motion picture studios were hated due to outbreak of war, and by 1949, the film industry experienced change and could no longer control their film. Communists began campaigning to ban American films in China. By October 1950, American films were no longer in China. In return, the government replaced American films with European films. Japan cinema developed with increasing industrialization, westernization, and urbanization. After the Great Earthquake in 1923, movies became even more popular. The disaster had made the audiences ready for light entertainment, for a way to pass time.
When Japan was expanding its empire, the Japanese government saw cinema as the perfect propaganda tool to show people the glory and invincibility of the empire. But not only were their films historical, a new genre of film evolved. In the early 1900s, the Japanese began to feel the influence of two Western inventions, the comic strip and the motion picture. In 1914, cartoonists began experimenting with animated films. Japan's first successful film was Kitayama Satoru's Momotaro. In America, animated films were shown to be just as popular as live films, inspiring the man who is credited with the success of anime, Osamu Tezuka. Tezuka became interested in cartoons and created his first work, Shintakarajima. Tezuka created his characters using inspiration from Disney cartoons such as Mickey Mouse. During the mid-1950s, Hiroshi Okawa became president of the Toei Japanese Film Company in hopes of producing animated films similar to Walt Disney. In 1956, Toei Animation was created, and their first film, The Tale of the White Serpent, was published. Historically, Korean cinema has been virtually invisible to the world. To most Koreans, film was an object of curiosity and rarity. In 1903, foreign films were presented to the Korean public for the first time. Under Japanese government, Korea couldn't have their own industry without substantial financial backing and a strong economic and social infrastructure. In 1919, the Righteous Revenge started the beginning of Korean film. The Japanese invasion in Manchuria in 1931 and the war effort slowly transformed Korea into a propaganda machine. Moviegoers rose from 2.6 million in 1927 to 8.8 million in 1935. South Korea today is a completely modern economic and cultural power, having adapted to and embraced technology in ways other nations haven't. Movies have swept East Asia in what has become known as the Korean Wave. During the Korean War, culture was lost and people demanded cinema. Cinema migrated to Busan to avoid the effects of the war. To stimulate a rebirth in cinema, cinema was exempt from all taxes. The early 1960s films, influenced by Italian neorealism, showed Korea's struggle to recover. Im Kwon-taek was a prominent figure in representing Korea's transformation. In 1933, his film Sopienje revived the hope of a revival for the national film industry by attracting the highest number of spectators. And by 1999, a new Korean action thriller called Shahiri attracted more audience than the Hollywood film Titanic. In the past, Korean films were completely ignored, but now they are noticed. We have to make films based on our stories, the ones that no one else can tell. Cinema is the heart and soul of South Korea. However, not everything about the motion picture industries were positive.
It can give people unrealistic expectations about their lives.
Also, censorship was a big issue in certain industries.
Could censorship be positive?
I think what was interesting is the positive impact censorship has had. Creative filmmakers found ways to suggest what could not be openly filmed. This led to films that rest their meanings in metaphors.
Overall, motion pictures significantly revolutionized both Americans and people globally. It not only changed people's lives, but it also changed worldwide entertainment industries.
Well, I think it broadens their knowledge of the world, particularly I think with documentaries.